All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi again, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight to learn about police oversight. We will be going over the different models and frameworks of police oversight, and we'll have an opportunity for attendees to ask questions. And we'll also be joined later on tonight by a panel of 5 practitioners and subject matter experts that will be sharing some of their experiences and insights with police oversight that we hope you will find useful. Again, for folks that want to participate and ask questions, we have 2 ways that you can do that tonight. You can use the Zoom chat feature if you have the Zoom app. You just click on the chat button and type in your question. Or if you're calling in, you can text your question to area code 714-512-2495. So let's find out a little bit about what police oversight is. Police oversight is external or non-police oversight of a law enforcement agency or police department. A police oversight board or commission typically consists of a group of non-police individuals, usually referred to as civilians, who independently oversee and review the actions of a police department, such as complaints or concerns against the police department or any of their officers. And what does police oversight look like? They vary significantly across jurisdictions, but the simplest police oversight mechanisms or models consist of a board of residents that review the findings of investigations conducted by a police department's internal affairs division. These types of police oversight mechanisms often have little or no budgetary authority, and the members serve on a voluntary basis. More organizationally complex police oversight mechanisms may include paid full-time staff, lawyers, investigators, policy analysts, all of whom report to the police oversight board or commission. These types of mechanisms often have substantial budgetary authority, the ability to conduct independent investigations into complaints from residents, and the ability to access police evidence records. So again, while the different types of police oversight models can vary, they generally are categorized into the following 3 classifications. The first of which is the investigation-focused model. This model involves routine, independent investigations of complaints against police officers, which may replace or duplicate police internal affairs processes staffed by non-police civilian investigators. The second model is the review-focused model. And this model concentrates on commenting on completed investigations after reviewing the quality of police internal affairs investigations. With this model, recommendations may be made to police executives regarding findings, or there may be a request that further investigations be conducted. And finally, the auditor-monitor model focuses on examining broad patterns in complaints investigations, including patterns in the quality of investigations, findings, and disciplines rendered. In some cities that use this model, monitors may actively participate in or monitor open internal investigations. This model seeks to promote broad organizational change by conducting systematic reviews of police policies, practices, or training, and making recommendations for improvement. There are over 200 different models of police oversight in the U.S., and they differ, like I mentioned, on classification. Some of them overlap, and again, they, however, can generally be classified under one of these 3. Some police oversight mechanisms have the ability to issue subpoenas. A subpoena is an order issued by a legal authority that orders a person to give a written or spoken statement or orders the production of evidence, and failing to listen to the subpoena results in fine or imprisonment generally. So police oversight with investigatory, or subpoena powers. So these types of models consist of assigned members who have the additional authority to investigate complaints separately and externally from the police department. The Board or Commission may make findings because of such investigations and make specific recommendations to administrators regarding discipline or policy. Some of the advantages of this type of model is the ability to provide increased public confidence in misconduct investigations and give the community a greater sense of inclusion. This model typically provides additional oversight as investigations and findings come from an agency other than the police department. Some of the disadvantages are that members must be highly trained and willing to spend a considerable amount of time to conduct fair, unbiased, and consistent investigations. Substandard investigations can create significant problems for the community and police department. The Board or Commission must have the ability to compel evidence and the ability to hear testimony from officers. This type of model would require significant and adequate funding to function properly. Police oversight mechanisms without investigatory or subpoena powers. So this model consists of members who review police misconduct investigations to determine whether they were conducted appropriately and adequately. Members agree or disagree with findings of the internal affairs investigation and may make recommendations. This type of police oversight may also provide proposals or recommendations regarding departmental policies. Some of the advantages include that boards or commissions without investigatory powers can produce findings more quickly than an investigatory model. This model also provides an opportunity for residents to be directly involved and have input on policy issues. Some of the disadvantages are that a large amount of labor and time is required for those serving on the board or commission. Members must have some knowledge and training to identify problems in complex investigations, and without investigatory powers, the board or commission is limited to the evidence and investigation conducted by an internal affairs division. So for more information on police oversight and what we are examining in Santa Ana, you can visit our website at www.santa-ana.org/cm/police-oversight, or you can call the city manager's office at 714-647-5200. Something that we're working on right now is a community feedback survey. We are interested in hearing from our constituents to find out what our constituents think about police oversight. Do you support police oversight? Do you think police oversight is needed in Santa Ana? Yes or no? If yes, what do you envision police oversight looking like in Santa Ana? Our community feedback survey is available on our website, the same website that I described earlier, and the survey is available in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. We encourage all of our community members to participate and take the survey if you haven't done so already. And what's next? So our staff is working on community engagement around police oversight. So example is tonight's forum, the community feedback survey that's going out, and our staff has also been out at our Movies in the Park community booths, for example, with flyers and tablets to encourage folks to take the survey. So we're continuing those efforts. When we're done with the data collection with the survey and the results from tonight's forum, we'll compile that into a report that will go to the City Council next month in September 2021. That concludes the portion of the informational presentation, and I'm now available for questions. So I will toggle over to some of the questions that have come up during the presentation so far. And again, if you'd like, please feel free to use the chat feature below to type in your questions, or you can text 714-512-2495. And I will start with the first question. Will the presentation be available to download after the webinar? Yes, absolutely. We will add the presentation to our website at the same URL that I mentioned earlier. It will be available for download. The next question is, just a second. Can you please explain who or what NACOL is? Yes, so NACOL stands for the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. They are one of many organizations that work in the area of police oversight. This particular organization happens to provide assistance to governments that are exploring police oversight. In my experience with researching this topic, a lot of jurisdictions that we've reached out to and that we've examined as part of our discovery phase recommended that we reach out to NACOL, and it's just, again, just one of the many resources for police oversight. Okay, the next question is regarding dispatch. What oversight exists for dispatchers? I have numerous members of my community telling me that dispatch is rude and dismissive on routine calls and refuses to send help. What oversight exists to ensure that calls are responded to and residents treated as valued members of our communities rather than an inconvenience? That is a great question, and I don't have an answer for that right now. I can certainly check in with our Santa Ana Police Department and our folks that run our dispatch center and find out. And what I can do as well is all these questions and answers will we'll transcribe them in writing and share them on our website so folks can go back and find the answers there. The next question is, how will the oversight committee be selected? We are not, sorry. Our research shows that the way that members of police oversight boards, commissions, groups, et cetera, are selected, appointed in different ways. Right now, we're still in the research and discovery phase of police oversight, so no decision has been made as to how a potential police oversight mechanism body of folks would be selected for Santa Ana. That is one of the questions, or there are a couple of questions in our community feedback survey that ask for folks to offer their opinions on this specific topic. So I encourage you to check out our community feedback survey. That information would be relayed back to our city council as they continue to consider this topic. The next question is, which model gives civilians the most discretion? I am not sure how to answer that question. So I'll have to hold off on that question for now and gather some information. That question and answer will also be posted on our city website. Okay, the next question. Is oversight solely over the police department or over the Police Officers Association as well? My understanding is that the police oversight is for the law enforcement agency or the police department. So in Santa Ana, our police department is the Santa Ana Police Department, and my understanding is that any police oversight mechanism that we could have in place would be for our police department. Okay. Next question. If fines and imprisonment are the consequences for ignoring subpoenas from the investigatory model, will there be a mechanism in place that will ensure community members and taxpayers are not paying for police officers ignoring subpoenas? Paul, I'm not sure how to answer that question either, but that's something that I can look. I'll have to look into this topic as well and also post the question and the corresponding answer to our city website.
Thank you, Daniel. If I could just chime in for a moment too. I think some of these questions, they get into a lot of the details of how some of these police oversight models work. We might get some answers to some of that in some form from our panelists, because they'll be explaining a lot of the oversight models that they use in the real world right now. So they'll be able to, I think, shed some light on how some of these models can work, and gives us some options to consider going forward for Santa Ana.
Thanks, Paul. Do we have any other questions that have come in, or?
Let me see.
And also, all of our panelists are here now.
Okay, we have a couple more questions coming in just a moment.
Awesome.
There are a couple more added there for you, Daniel.
Perfect. How do we make sure police officers' records of misconduct are used to verify and, if needed, deny employment to bad officers? That's a good question, and I unfortunately don't have an answer to that one either. So I'll have to do some research and also post that corresponding answer on our city website following tonight's forum, if that's okay. The next question is, would findings and recommendations by any police oversight board or commission have any force? I'm not sure what the individual means by force, but I think this answer in brief is that it depends. I think it would depend on the scope of authority or scope of responsibility for a particular police oversight board or commission. And the next question is, how are the monthly statistics of police reports evaluated, and how does the city review those results? Is that right? Okay. So that sounds like a performance-based questions. I'm not sure what types of reporting for our police department, for example, is available. I can certainly find out and see how those reports, if they're recurring reports. I'm not sure if there are certain types of reports that are produced monthly, how those are reviewed and evaluated. But that's something that I can find out and also put on our city website. And I think
and I would add that Dan, there are I don't know about the monthly, but certainly annual crime reports, both produced by the police department and by the FBI, that for all police departments and law enforcement agencies. And so that is something that is always publicly available when that's released.
Okay. All right. So if those are all the questions, Paul, do you think we can transition over to our panel?
We have a couple more coming in, but yeah, I think it's probably time to transition over to the panel since we have them all here, and it's about time for them to begin their discussion.
All right, let's do it. All right, so I am grateful and pleased to introduce our 5 panelists for tonight's meeting. And I'll just read a quick bio for each of them, and then we'll go ahead and transition over. So the first of our 5 panelists is John Alden. He's the Executive Director of the Oakland Community Police Review Agency. And John has served in this role since July 2019. He brings to Oakland a decade of deep experience in police accountability. He previously worked for the San Francisco Department of Police Accountability, formerly known as the Office of Citizen Complaints, and also for the Internal Affairs Division of the San Francisco Police Department. In those offices, he managed the investigation of complaints of police misconduct and use of excessive force, litigated disciplinary hearings, and advocated for changes in police policies and procedures. John also served as the managing attorney for the Independent Investigations Bureau in the San Francisco District Attorney's Office, a unit specializing in the investigation and prosecution of officer-involved shootings, in-custody deaths, and other forms of potentially criminal officer misconduct. Before working in police accountability, John began his career as a prosecutor, working in Sonoma and Marin counties, and then transitioned to private practice, litigating employment law matters. Early in his career, he worked in the state legislature as an Unruh Fellow. John received both his law degree and bachelor's degree from the University of California at Berkeley. Our next panelist is Tiffany Bailey. Tiffany is a Munger, Tolles, and Olson Fellow and staff attorney at the ACLU of Southern California. Her work centers on issues relating to policing, including gang injunctions and databases issues. Tiffany was previously an Arthur Lyman Fellow for the Economic Justice Project at the ACLU of Southern California, where she worked on issues relating to the over-policing and criminalization of the unhoused community. Tiffany graduated from Yale Law School. She clerked on the California Supreme Court for Justice Leandra R. Kruger and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals for Judge Marcia S. Burson. Our third panelist is Michael Giannacco. He is the independent auditor for the Anaheim Police Review Board and the principal of OIR Group. Michael provides services in the field of independent oversight. He serves as a monitor for negotiated agreements involving police reform, assists federal courts in developing remedial plans intended to cure deficits, to cure defects in constitutional policing, conducts independent reviews of critical incidents, including officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths, conducts audits of law enforcement departments focusing on review of internal investigative processes and policies, and undertakes independent internal investigations of allegations of police misconduct. Prior to his work in police oversight, Michael served as an assistant U.S. attorney, chief of the Civil Rights Section, and was responsible for prosecuting police officers for excessive force and other constitutional violations. Our fourth panelist tonight is George Lippman. He is the former chair and member of the former Berkeley Police Review Commission. George was instrumental in the city of Berkeley's transition to the Police Accountability Board, which was established earlier this year and held their first meeting last month. George remains active in the Berkeley community and currently serves on the Peace and Justice Commission. And finally, Eileen Teichert. Eileen Monaghan Teichert is beginning her third year on the Riverside Community Police Review Commission and her first year as chair. She is a retired attorney who formerly served as Riverside Supervising Deputy City Attorney, San Bernardino County Transportation Authority General Counsel, and the City Attorney for the City of Sacramento. Welcome and thank you all for joining, and I will hand this over to Paul Eakins to moderate the panel.
Thank you, Daniel. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you taking your time to be with us today, to our panelists, and to all of our residents and other members of the public who are participating today. We really do appreciate your your participation, because it's important that we have the community's involvement in these important decisions. So starting with our moderators, now that they've all had their introduction, our panelists, now that they've all had their introductions, I was hoping that you could each provide briefly, because we have a lot of questions, both from us here to kind of get things going, and also I'm sure from the public. Give us a brief overview of how you see police oversight fitting into modern day policing, and what is its role. And you can talk about your specific ones that you've worked with for some specific examples. That would be great. And why don't we just start in no particular order here. We'll start with Mr. Alden first, please.
Sure. First, I want to say thanks for having me, and I'm glad the city of Santa Ana is thinking about how you might want to do police oversight in Santa Ana. I think the way that oversight fits into law enforcement today is it is an essential feedback loop for any city to figure out whether or not their law enforcement officers, in your case, your police officers, really are policing in a way that's consistent with community expectations. Historically, in most cities, there really wasn't much of a feedback loop for that, other than perhaps some feedback to the city council, who might take that into account as they're picking a police chief. It's not to say that's not a strong feedback loop, but in many places, that was the only feedback loop. And so I think a real strength of community oversight and civilian oversight moving forward, and we see this in many places in California in particular, is that it gives the community a very direct way to have input over individual complaints about police misconduct, about patterns of police behavior through the auditor model that you were talking about, and even through changing police department policies, which historically tend to be written behind closed doors without any public input. And these three powers, I think, can really dramatically alter the way that police behave in a community. And I think those three feedback loops are really vitally important. And I think you can see in many cities how that's really improved the relationship between police and the community, and led to policing that's ultimately more closely aligned with our current expectations about de-escalation, community policing, and transparency.
Very good, thank you. I'll move on here to Mr. Janako, and also can I just say for our panelists, we also want this to be a discussion. So as we get going on this, if anyone wants to chime in or offer another thought on a topic, I think we can have a sort of open dialogue here too. So, but I'll let Mr. Janako go ahead and share your thoughts on this.
Thanks, Paul. And I also appreciate the opportunity to participate in this evening's forum and look forward to how Santa Ana proceeds based on the community outreach that they are doing in this important topic. Paul, if you want to have a discussion, let me just start by saying I disagree with everything John just said. How's that for starters? I'm just kidding. John and I go way back. But I will build on what John said to say, I do think that in today's day and age, consistent with former President Obama's task force, 21st Century Policing Task Force recommendation, that some form of oversight is important and probably necessary for every agency, for every city to think about. And what that looks like, as the introductory presentation indicated, should be obviously tailored to the interests, needs, and wants of city leadership and the community itself. But that being said, some sort of oversight, I think, is indispensable as we move forward into this century. What I would say is also that, as John indicated, 50, 60 years ago, well, there was no oversight. So this is a relatively new concept that is increasingly growing, but rocket ships are actually older than oversight, if you can believe that. And for that reason, we are still evolving. We're still trying to figure out one solution probably doesn't work for all, for a lot of reasons. But the whole point, and I would amplify on what John said, agreed with him entirely, is to is to have a paradigm shift whereby in the 50s, in the 40s, in the 30s, and the 60s even, police departments were largely able to figure out how to do public safety, how to provide that function on their own and entirely within their organization. And I think that oversight is changing the paradigm whereby there's an understanding that community involvement, community voice, community participation in the way in which public safety is performed in any jurisdiction is really what's necessary. And that's what oversight really is all about when you boil it down.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bailey, could you please share your thoughts?
Sure, and I just want to echo what has already been said by the panelists. Really happy to be here in community with the folks of Santa Ana as they consider civilian oversight. I think what civilian oversight can do in the modern era is in cities like Santa Ana, where there is mistrust of law enforcement because of past abuses and misconduct by the law enforcement agency. Civilian oversight can be a meaningful first step in creating a police department that's transparent and accountable to the people that they serve. It's obviously not the only step in the process, and it will only work if the model that is produced is strong and as effective as it can be. So if done correctly, I mean, meaning like has independent investigation authority, subpoena power, and all these other tools that make civilian oversight particularly effective. If done correctly, it can address and be responsive to the harm that was done in the community and kind of help mend some of that mistrust that may or may not be there.
Great, thank you. All right, very good. And Ms. Tykert, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, you are. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about the City of Riverside's model and I think how it fits into, I think, the current view of oversight, community oversight of policing. Riverside's model dates back over 21 years, and sadly, it arose out of an officer-involved death, which caused a great community hue and cry, as well as a national hue and cry. We had national figures outside of City Hall. I was supervising deputy city attorney back then, and I would look out over the balcony and I would see these protests that were going on, and rightly so, over what happened with the shooting. And the result was that the city council adopted an ordinance establishing the commission, and that was in 2000. And then in 2005, it was put onto the ballot as a charter amendment. And so now it is hardwired into the city charter. So it can't be changed readily by a change in the city council. It has evolved over time so that now the City of Riverside has really an amalgam of the different models that are being considered. We have the investigative focused model where we do have subpoena power over persons and documents, which is mandatory if there's an officer-involved death. We have a review-focused model in practice when it comes to other complaints against the police department. We do have discretion with those, however, to conduct public hearings, to subpoena witnesses and documents. So far we've been, well, I've been on the commission, it hasn't been necessary. We've been able to handle those in closed session. And then the auditor monitor model, we also perform auditor functions, reviewing at least annually whether or not the complaints were appropriately handled internally by police department, as well as now with the recent change in the law, we'll be getting the racial profiling data as well. And we will be an integral part of that for reviewing that for the city. I think it's important for communities with large police departments, and I think Santa Ana falls within that category, to give the public assurance that there is an independent body, people that are non-biased and are looking at these complaints to hopefully identify problems in policing before you have that big incident happening.
Great, thank you. That's very informative. I'll move on here to Mr. Lippman now. If you want to answer the same question, which is, how do you see police oversight fitting into modern day policing? Oh, you're muted though, sir.
There. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I hail from up in Berkeley, the next door neighbor to Mr. Alden's Oakland. And I think all of the speakers have hit on some important points. I especially think Tiffany Bailey's presentation was excellent. And I agree with what Mr. Alden was saying, although I would perhaps put it a little more strongly. In a democracy, we say that government derives from the will of the people, the will of the governed. And even to go further, I think in this day and age, it must have the involvement of the people. That is a more direct form of democracy. I would like to talk a little bit about the background of the Police Review Commission and how it's been transformed at the appropriate time. I think I would like to say that President Obama's 21st Century Policing Report, which was referred to before, it stresses that there's a crisis of legitimacy for the police departments in the entire country. That's a really significant problem, and I don't want to speak for Santa Ana, but I think it's an issue here, and it's an issue in Berkeley, and I think it's an issue in communities of color around the country. So we just, if we're going to have police departments function, there must be a trust in on the part of the community in the police department, and legitimacy has to be restored, and the ability for community members to have transparency and oversight into what's really going on in the department is fundamental. And progressive police chiefs around the country have come to accept that. So I'd like to talk a little more about the transformation that we've gone through to setting up, as Daniel was discussing, the new form and why we felt we had to go that direction. But I'll cede the ground for now and look forward to another chance to get into that.
Well, actually, that actually is a good segue, because the next thing I was going to ask, starting with you, was sort of what, for your specific agency and your mission, if you could kind of describe to us a little bit of how it functions. What is the process that it uses, say, like in its meetings? Are these public meetings? Can the public come and provide input, on a specific, police oversight case that's before the Board or Commission? What does that look like?
Sure. So, well, I first have to distinguish between the Police Review Commission, which was created in 1973 in the aftermath of the 1960s, and with the influence of the Black Panther Party pushing for community control of the police. So that's what we wound up with, was a pretty strong mandate with a lot of power over the police department, but over the years it's been eviscerated by police association lawsuits and for other reasons, and it became very weak. It's now become, as Steichert was describing, a charter amendment, so it's at the level of the Constitution of the city, and that can't be weakened by the city council. So it's stronger. It is still advisory. We had hoped to go with a model based on Mr. Alden's organization, which is called Measure LL. It was passed in 2016 in Oakland, which would be over the entire police department. And that's very strong. We weren't able to achieve that through the ballot or through the city council. So we wound up with a strengthened version of the old Police Review Commission. So basically, these commissions do two things, no matter what their form. They deal with civilian complaints, sometimes internal departmental complaints, and they basically advise on the city manager on discipline. And the second is policy. And again, it's advisory for us. We don't have the ability to make policy directly. We can only advise on it. So our meetings are open, except for the meetings where a judgment is made against on a complaint against an individual officer. Those have been closed to the public since the Copley decision, which I believe was in San Diego, and so that's a statewide issue. So I don't know of any place in California that's able to happen. But for the other part, there's always open meetings and they're always able to make comment.
So if you're, say, making policy decisions, that would be open, but if it's a specific disciplinary issue, then that would be closed to the public.
That's correct. The general meetings are always open, and subcommittee meetings.
And when it comes to decisions, it sounds like from what you were saying that the commission makes a recommendation to the city manager, but that's ultimately the city management's decision as to what happens in that case, right? It's yours is more of an advisory role in making that recommendation.
Essentially, yes, but with the new Police Accountability Board, was our measure II that passed last November, we are no longer, or it is no longer reporting to the city manager. It's reporting directly to the city council. And that's one of the two most important things that was changed, really critical, because there's a built-in conflict of interest between within the city manager's role overseeing the police department. She essentially is the super chief of the police department, and at the same time managing the external civilian review process. That had to be stopped. We've been fighting for that for decades, and now we achieved that. That's one, and the other is the ability of the commission and the professional director of police accountability to get, without limitation, confidentially, internal police records, personnel records, and other data from the police department and other city departments. That's a really strong change, and we're hopeful that the board will step up and use that for some of the critical issues we're facing.
Okay, thank you for that. So Ms. Teichert, how does that compare to your commission? Is it a board or commission for you?
It is a commission, and I think that Mr. Lippman's point, I've been taking down notes of his statements, because City of Riverside's commission reports, we make our recommendations to the city manager. Our budget really comes from the city manager. So there is, that is, you know, they are a filter, if you will, for it directly going to the city council. However, as part of the charter, it does give us the directive to advise the mayor and the city council on all police community relations issues. We have not been very active in that capacity, and since I've taken over as chair, it's kind of top of my list of things to do, is to make sure that we have that direct pipeline to the city council. But I really like Mr. Lippman's model in Measure II, where it is a direct report to the city council.
Got it. Very good. Okay. I will go to, I was going to skip Mr. Giannakoulis. He disappeared for a moment. There he is. Okay. If you want to share, now I know you've worked with a lot of different cities in different roles, I believe, right? For various consultant and oversight roles, Mr. Giannakoulis. So you've probably seen a lot of different models, but what's the current ones that you're working with now? Are they a similar approach for most of them, or have you seen something significantly different among some of the other cities that you've worked with?
Yeah, so I am we are currently the independent police auditor for about half a dozen cities in the state of California. And I have worked with all the models, the review model, the investigative model, and then the auditor model and what I call the hybrid model. And they're like snowflakes, no two are alike. And that's okay. But what I think is important is to find a way in which the community is able to have a voice in systemic issues, the way in which policies are devised, the way in which those are the rules of engagement really for police officers, hiring decisions, promotions, how those work, how officers are evaluated. So there's a lot of things in which, again, as I said earlier, community had no involvement in, where I think there is room for involvement. I think the most effective oversight models that I'm currently involved in do have a community component, by that a commission or board who are members of the community. But I also think that what I have found to be the most effective model is also to have a professional that can assist the board with regard to reviews, with regard to audits, with regard to importing best practices. And in my view, a review board without a professional, without some sort of independent assistance and expertise is going to be largely at sea, because policing is a very complicated and increasingly in the weeds kind of operation. There's so much to learn that even individuals of goodwill are not going to be able to get up to speed in order to accomplish the objectives here. And I think that assistance of an independent third party, I think, is crucial. That being said, access by somebody to information is crucial. And so sometimes that is accomplished by having the independent police auditor or the professional have that level of access, which means anything that the auditor wants, the auditor gets. There was some information earlier about subpoena power, et cetera, et cetera. I've been doing this work for 20 years for cities, and I've never had to rely on subpoena power for information. That information should be supplied. And the police chief works for the city manager, and the city manager works for council. So if there's going to be support from the city for oversight, that shouldn't be a hurdle. There should never, subpoenas are very, I used to be a prosecutor, I used to issue subpoenas all the time. And I can tell you, subpoenas are very inefficient, ineffective ways to get information. There has to be an understanding that if an auditor or the commission, if the commission's entitled to confidential information, should get what they want. And without a commitment from city leadership to that end, I don't care about subpoena power or not, you're not going to be successful.
Interesting, thank you. Could I just ask the group, with all of the boards and commissions you've worked with, do you all have some sort of person in that role, as Mr. Janako was saying, about having a professional working with the advisory board to play that role of sort of an auditor or whatever other role that might be?
The city of Riverside does.
Yeah, okay, thumbs up there from Mr. Lippman. Mr. Alden, how about you guys as well in Oakland?
Yeah, we have actually a pretty substantial staff. Our total budget is this year going to be about 5.5 million, and the following year it'll be about 6 million. And right now we have about 15 staff positions. That's going to go up to about 20.
Oh, okay, wow. So is so that's a lot of positions for that. So so now that we're on you, could you talk a little bit more about how yours operates then, and is it again a similar model to some of these? And sort of piggybacking on that, there was one of the questions I noticed right at the end of our first Q&A session before we started the panel was about the reason that Oakland established that and that it was a court-ordered.
It was not actually. It's totally unrelated to the court order. So I'll try to make this brief. It's a little bit of a complicated history, but Oakland has had a civilian oversight model for quite some time, since late 20th century and roughly the early 80s. But it was a review model, very similar to what you've heard from some of the other folks that are on the line about what they're doing now. The opinions were advisory. There was some opportunity for input, but access to information was limited, and control over policy and outcome on disciplinary cases was also very limited. About 15 years ago, the city of Oakland became subject to a federal court oversight program. This is not through the United States Department of Justice, which you see in many other cities. Instead, it came to pass because a series of private plaintiffs, with the aid of their lawyers, successfully sued the city of Oakland. Successfully in the sense that the city decided to have a negotiated settlement agreement rather than take the case to trial. And that negotiated settlement agreement has been in place for roughly the last 15 years. It does not speak to civilian oversight at all. There is nothing in that document about civilian oversight. There are a series of requirements for the police department about how they manage themselves. Now, about 5 years ago, after regrettably yet another of the series of scandals we've had with our discipline system in the city of Oakland for police officers, there was a move by many in the community to put onto the ballot a charter amendment that revised that old former review system I talked about to create the system we have now. That measure passed in 2016, and we've been building out that system ever since. So in the current model, we have a police commission with members of the public appointed to those seats. And that police commission has a series of powers. It supervises an investigative agency, which I head, and can hire and fire that department head, me. Our agency, the CPRA, the Community Police Review Agency, has the power to investigate every civilian complaint or public complaint about police officer conduct in the city of Oakland. Now, realistically, we have the budget to only investigate 50 to 60% of those, but we have some priorities that we've been given by the voters and by the commission as to which ones to prioritize. The police commission, based on those investigations, has the power to set discipline in those cases. It's not advisory. It's not up to the city administrator. It's not up to the chief of police ultimately or the mayor. The commission just simply sets the discipline. There's a much more complicated system than what I've just described for that, but ultimately it boils down to the commission having that authority. They're no longer advisory or merely a review panel. They set the discipline, and they have in fact fired officers over the objection of chiefs of police.
So how does it move?
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
How does it move from, say, because obviously there's going to be that day-to-day disciplinary matter that the police chief and command staff have to deal with, right? How does it move from that to you? I mean, obviously, like I imagine there's some sort of citizen complaint or something, but there must be some process before it gets in front of you guys, right? So is it...
I think I'm following your question, but tell me if this answer isn't quite responsive. But we have access to the complete stream of all of the complaints that come in. So, you know, as I think your question implies, a lot of complaints that people make about police officers are made in the field in the moment. So someone might be having an experience with a police officer they think is wrong, and they'll say right then, hey, this isn't fair, this isn't right. I want to complain about this. I want to talk to your supervisor. I want to talk to your sergeant. I want to file a complaint. And if that happens, then the officers in the field are required to call a supervisor, memorialize that complaint. That part of the process is actually mandated by a court order that we have now. But then once that complaint is memorialized, we at CPRA receive that complaint and can investigate it from there. Members of the public can also come to us directly. Under our former model from years ago, our predecessor agency, using that review model, only examined cases that came directly to the Civilian Oversight Agency, and that was a really small number. Today, we have the ability to review and investigate all of those complaints, which is usually around 1,000 a year.
How many? 1,000?
1,000. That's typical. It varies a little from year to year. It kind of goes up and down. Some years 800, some years 1,100, but that's a typical stream.
Okay.
So, you know, our police commission also has unfettered access to the records of the police department. Our CPRA, our investigative agency, has even access to police officer personnel records, which is very helpful when we're trying to figure out if an officer has a pattern of misbehavior in the past. In addition to not recommending, but setting discipline in cases, we establish whether the case should be sustained, whether there's actually something the officer did wrong, and secondly, what the level of discipline is, right, which could be as high as termination. Our police commission also has a very strong role with respect to selecting and in some cases terminating the chief of police. Our commission creates a short list of police chief candidates, which goes to the mayor, and the mayor picks from that list. In addition to that, our police commission can either, with the concurrence of the mayor for any reason, fire the police chief, which they have done once so far, or alternatively, if they can establish cause for termination, they can terminate the police chief for cause. So that's a pretty robust power. Our police commission also has the ability to set policy in many aspects of police department behavior and conduct, particularly use of force, constitutional policing, racial profiling. And in that regard, if the commission and the police department disagree about a policy that the police commission has implemented, there is a policy by which that disagreement could go to the city council. And so far we haven't had to trigger that, but that's the ultimate dispute resolution mechanism. So it's not an absolute power, but it's substantial. Certain of the police department's policies must come to the police commission for approval if the police department wants to change them. Our commission is also about to start supervising an inspector general, which we'll be hiring in the next few months. And that inspector general takes the audit model that you were describing earlier, and we'll be looking for patterns in police department behavior and performance to see how policy can better be changed in the future. So pretty soon we will have an auditor model, as you described, an investigative model, as you described earlier, which includes the ability to set discipline, not just recommend discipline, and this supervisory power over the police chief and certain policies for the police department. So it's an extremely robust model, but as we discussed earlier, that requires a lot of staff.
Yeah, sounds like it.
It's far too much work for even the best intentioned and best prepared volunteer panel to do on their own.
Great. All right, thank you. That's very informative, and it's interesting to see the wide range of different models that we have here. So coming back to Ms. Bailey here, thank you for your patience. I wanted to come to you last, since unlike the other folks on the panel, you're not serving on a police advisory commission or working for a police advisory commission, right? So I wanted to get your take and see if, you know, if the way they explain this, if this is what you typically have seen in your work as far as police oversight models, and if there's anything else that you think are important models that we may have missed or you might want to discuss as well.
Yeah, I think the models that have already been discussed kind of run the gamut. You know, you have hybrid models, you have all sorts of things. I think of the models that have already been discussed, the Oakland model, which really is multifaceted, it touches on all the different kind of components that are necessary for civilian oversight to be effective. It's not enough for them just to be able to, like for a board to simply review an internal affairs investigation. It's important for them to be able to act on that, to hold officers accountable. So an Oakland model that allows folks to be very involved in discipline, but also not to be advisory, is particularly powerful. It means that it's just not a rubber stamp or just a review of the investigation, but the community is actively engaged on what's going on. Also, similarly, the unfettered access to police records, ability to review exactly what is going on in the department to ensure that the board is getting the information that it needs to really look at the issue and provide like a fair and unbiased kind of recommendation based off of that. And then also the ability to change policy for it not only to be advisory, but to recommend it in certain circumstances. So I think the kind of hybrid model that Oakland has adopted really kind of checks so many of the different boxes. And I think folks have kind of teased this out earlier, but a civilian oversight model that doesn't touch all these different boxes just isn't going to be effective. I see folks talking in the chat about all the different like political actors, whether it be the police unionists, like the police union, as well as the city council. I think a way to kind of ensure that the Civilian Oversight Board is responsive to all those different political actors, but also still effective, is to kind of the people power, to ensure that the community is engaged, to ensure that the board is as strong as it possibly can be. And so of the different models that we've kind of discussed, you know, communities are going to develop whatever is the best model for them. But of those discussed, I would say, in at least my review of the different models throughout the country, Oakland has a pretty strong model that ensures that the board will basically hold officers accountable for misconduct, but also been given the tools, whether it be professionals that can train them or professionals that can do the investigations themselves, to ensure that they get to a just outcome.
Okay. Great, thank you for that insight. We are starting to get close to, I think we're to the time when we should do the Q&A, ask some of the questions. I've seen a lot of things popping up here in the chat, but before I get to that, I had one other question I wanted to ask the group, and just if you could just briefly answer, but I wanted to see what your thoughts are on how having this oversight body has affected the relationship between the community and the police department, and have you seen a change, positive, negative? You know, has it had a significant impact? And Ms. Bailey, I know that since we have you right now, again, you don't work for any one specific board or commission, but if what has your experience been on that front?
Sorry, can you? I just want to make sure I understand your question more fully.
Yeah. Having a police oversight body of some sort has affected or changed the relationship between the community and the police department and law enforcement, positively or negatively, or in any other way?
Yeah, I think civilian oversight boards that have a lot of community engagement, so the board is comprised of community members, can be particularly powerful. And they're especially powerful when the municipality ensures that the board is representative of the community itself. So that means that community members who are most impacted by the harms and abuses of law enforcement that they're serving on the board, that they're given an opportunity to weigh in. It means that the municipality, in establishing the board, solicits and really listens to the output of community organizations who are on the ground, who understand, you know, what the community's concerns are. That way they can be more responsive to it. That way you can ensure that the board is really responsive to the grievances that the community has. So I think boards that are comprised of community members, particularly impacted people, can be particularly powerful. I think it can go a long way of kind of mending some of the mistrust that folks have of law enforcement due to police misconduct and abuses.
Are most boards then typically appointed by the council, or are there other some models? And for any of you, really, do any of you see models where they're not appointed by the council specifically, or by a political body?
Yeah, and I think some of the panelists can speak to it. I see some of them unmuting because they have some of those models. I'll just say some of the things that maybe aren't their models. There's models like in Atlanta that in which solicit people are elected, I believe, through community organizations. I'll let the folks in the panel speak, but just to say, like, folks can be elected by, you know, they solicit applications and the best applicants are selected, or through other things. So it doesn't just have to be through city council members. And in fact, I think there is real merit in it not just coming as like from the city, that it's truly independent of the city in that way. I think folks were talking about the Riverside model and the former Berkeley model, in which a lot of things went through the city manager. I think it goes really long way in terms of transparency for it to be completely independent of the city. So folks aren't selected through the city council, they're selected in another unbiased way. And I'll let Mr. Littman and Mr. Alden talk about the ways in which their boards select folks that are independent of city council.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I think that's an excellent presentation. I think the Atlanta type model is a wonderful thing to consider. Ours in the past and in the present in Berkeley is all selected by city council members. I think we looked at the idea of a straight election and backed away from that idea. The reason being, it might sound very democratic, but that the organizations with deep pockets we feared would take that over, and that meaning police associations, and that would be a great risk to subject ourselves to have essentially the board being bought and paid for. So we didn't really like that plan, but yes, getting away from purely being appointed by the board would be a positive thing.
Great, thank you.
Sorry,
and
by
just
the
very
council.
by the council, yeah. And just very briefly, so has that been a positive? Do you feel like it's been a positive impact on the relationship, or any other sort of impact on the relationship between the police department and officers and the community?
You're talking about the existence of civilian review at all? Sorry, going back to 1973.
I guess.
Mhm.
I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I would say that the police association has never accepted it, has always fought against it, and has not played a positive role. So I don't know. Associations might be different in different places, but what matters really is we've had city managers. Sorry.
What about between the community and the police department itself, though, and the officers? Do you feel like that has an impact?
I think the major thing that's changed is kind of the opposite of what's happened in Santa Ana, is the gentrification of Berkeley, going from a 30% Black community to maybe 6 or 7%. That's what's changed. There's great relationships actually between the majority community and the police department because it's a much richer community than it was. But there's a vast gulf between the experience of white and Black people in Berkeley when it comes to the police. And I've yet to meet more than 1 or 2 Black people in Berkeley that have not had a serious negative interaction. And that continues to today.
All right. Well, it's unfortunate to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for your views on that. Well, Mr. Giannacco,
Yeah.
you had some.
I just had some thoughts. I mean, so Anaheim, which is down the road from you all, I can tell you that their selection process looked at a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. For the reason that George indicated, there was a real concern about having representatives run for office and be elected because, quite frankly, the association could well hijack any review board, which is happening in Arizona as we speak, where a new law that was passed by the legislature in Arizona requires that anyone on a review board or any kind of oversight board in the state of Arizona has to be somebody who is a current or former police officer. So, and the other cautionary tale about private individuals being involved in the disciplinary process, I would just point to the experience in our city, in the city I live in, which is Los Angeles, where studies have shown that putting civilians on the decision-making body for the Los Angeles Police Department has actually worked to the disadvantage of accountability. And civilians have ended up becoming more lenient than the captains of the police department who used to sit on those boards. So there is some devil's advocate and some countervailing considerations. And so what Anaheim did was they had an application process. And instead of having council involved in selecting people who looked like them or acted like them or would sympathize with their position, they had a lottery, a good old-fashioned lottery, and individuals who qualified were picked out of a hat. And I think we've ended up with a good mix of individuals who do not have any particular allegiance to a council member and and I think that is another system that has worked very well as far as selection. Takes all the politics out of the process.
All right, thank you for that insight. Ms. Teichert, and then Mr. Alden will finish out with you two briefly here so we can get to some questions.
If I could ask a question myself regarding what other cities are doing with respect to background checks of potential commissioners. Do any of your cities conduct background checks, and are those conducted by the police department?
I think that Berkeley has just instituted background checks. That was part of Measure II. definitely not by the police department. It's being done by the city manager's office, but they're saying it's a very cursory check, just to make sure basically, do they live in the city of Berkeley? Things like that.
Okay.
How about the others? Do you know?
Well,
Handled
in Oakland, we have a statutory requirement that any background check for either the commissioners or anyone that works at CPRA or the Inspector General's office cannot be done by the police department. So it has to be done by someone else. And so far, we've used outside contractors for that purpose. And I think that is beneficial. I think there is an inherent conflict in having the police department do the background checks, particularly if they assess whether they think someone successfully completed the background check before they become a supervisor, potentially, you know, on a board or a commission like this over the police department.
And you're talking about criminal background checks are being conducted as well.
Oh, right. And then, you know, there are also processes that vary from city to city to confirm, as Mr. Lippman was saying, like, is this person really someone who lives in our city and has the experience they claim to have, in the same sort of way that you might double check someone's references if you're going to employ them, right? And I think that's thoughtful. I really like the question about selection methods. We're going to be doing a panel at NACOL in late August about this very question. How do you pick people for a commission or a board? And there are so many models. As others have said, the Atlanta model is fascinating. You have to have strong consensus in your community about which of your community organizations are going to pick which members of your board. But then you're really definitely putting in the hands of those community organizations, which can be salutary, right? Now, I think another thing that's really important to think about, in my opinion, is having a diversity of appointment methods. I think cities where, say, all of the members of the board are appointed by the mayor haven't fared as well. They haven't been as independent and they haven't been as community focused. I think that any model you might pick that has a variety of institutions picking the members of your board or commission is probably a good idea, and every community probably needs to think about that independently. In Oakland, we have a minority of the commissioners appointed directly by the mayor, and then a majority of the commissioners selected by a selection panel, which is itself picked by the mayor and the city council, but those members on the panel have a set of criteria they use for picking people they think will be well qualified. They solicit public applications and interview those people publicly. And, you know, like any other board or commission, they solicit public input on all of those applicants and why one or another, you know, might be best suited. And I think that's another model that's worth considering too.
Great, thank you. I'm going to transition on that point into our Q&A because there's a question that's related to this, which is, are justice impacted individuals eligible to serve on police oversight boards and commissions, which I think that means, you know, if someone does have a criminal background, you know, because I guess, you know, one can make the argument those are people who might have some insight into the issues, right? Are they able to serve on these commissions, or is there a certain threshold for that criminal having that you know that criminal history that would affect whether they can serve?
Yes, eligible, and historically the city of Oakland has encouraged people in that situation to apply.
Okay. Is that the same for the others, for the rest of you, or is that, how much of a factor is that? No, Ms. Teichert, I see you shaking your head. Is that a no, that they can't apply, or?
We have some language, and I'm trying to find it here, but they're not qualified if they're guilty of a felony, or we have some other language that applies generally to boards and commissioners, again, within our city charter. So I encourage City of Santa Ana to look very carefully at that language so you don't inadvertently exclude people that you don't want to exclude.
That's a good
I
point.
think it's very important, and I'm pretty sure Berkeley has impacted individuals on the board.
I've seen a lot of comments and questions in our chat about the role of the police association or police union, and I think sometimes people maybe don't understand the sort of separation, but in this case of all of your boards and commissions, they are overseeing oversight of the police department, complaints against police officers, and the police association is not a part of that oversight in any way, right? I mean, that's not, because that is not a city department, obviously, right? That's a union that's separate from the police department itself. So I don't know if there's more to say on that, but that's the case for all of you. There's not a role with your police association involved directly in your oversight role, correct?
So Paul, no, they're not. But I think maybe what the discussion is driving at is, depending on the oversight model that is adopted, and to the degree that it impacts the working conditions of police officers, those kinds of changes could well suffer from a lawsuit by the police association if they're not negotiated, if there's not any meet and confer process. That whole bargaining piece certainly has to come into consideration, again, depending on the kind of model that ends up being adopted. Sonoma County, the voters just tried to get oversight in Sonoma County, and a personnel commission just threw it all out, or most of it out, as a result of the failure to meet and confer or bargain with the Deputies Association.
Okay, that's informative. Thank you.
Also, to that point, there was a question earlier about dispatch. They're not, as not being sworn officers, they're also not subject to the oversight in this particular body.
That's not to say they couldn't be. I have certainly worked in police departments where the dispatchers are employees of the police departments, and our oversight has extended to issues involving dispatchers, animal control officers, zoning officials. Other individuals have direct impact and power over individuals, and I do think that any city should be thinking about that, which with regard to the breadth of the reach of the oversight model.
I agree, but there's also a conversation about taking dispatch away from the police entirely, or at least part of it, the part that decides about mental health calls and so forth, if there's a way to do that. So that's a separate conversation that's happening in many places.
If I might just add on to that too, that part that Mike Janako was noting about how the meet and confer process can be triggered based on what changes you want to make to your discipline system in your city, right? And that might require you to spend some time talking to whichever the affected union is prior to putting something like this on a ballot or passing an ordinance, right? An important thing to think about there is the scope of the set of employees that could be disciplined by or have discipline recommended by the panel you're creating. If you choose to make the body in Santa Ana one that only covers sworn police officers, I'm going to venture an educated guess that probably the only union you'll have to meet and confer with would be your Police Officers Association. If you choose to make your body one that also has control over some of the other employees of the police department, which is the case in several places, San Francisco, for example, there's probably going to be another union that you'll have to meet and confer with in addition to that, the one that's affected. In addition to the Peace Officers Association, might be a civilian employee union that's affected that you might need to meet and confer with. And if you're creating staff and creating new reporting obligations for those staff, that might trigger meet and confer too with whichever union represents the staff that you intend to hire for the commission. So there's a lot of ways in which you might end up needing to talk to your partners in labor about these ideas before you put them on the ballot.
And if I could just jump in real quickly, I'll just say that a lot of the conversation that we're having right now really emphasize the importance of community involvement and the people driving this to ensure that your elected officials, when they're going into those meet and confers, or even when contracts are up, I believe Santa Ana's is coming up very soon, that they're having conversations about these kinds of terms, that they're talking about these things to ensure that civilian oversight is able to be as effective as it possibly can be, and they're not triggering these different kinds of provisions within the MOU or the Memorandum of Understanding.
Great. Thank you so much. And on that note, I think we are finished here. This was a really great discussion, very informative, and I really thank all of you for your insights on this. And I hope the members of the public who joined us learned a lot, because I know I did. So thank you so much to all of the panelists for joining us. And for those who are watching, just a reminder, we do have the police oversight survey on our website. Daniel, if you could please put that into the chat one more time. We'll leave Zoom up for a minute, and that way anyone who wants to click the link or copy the link can do so they can go there. We encourage you to take that survey as well. We appreciate everyone's questions today and participation in this and discussing this important topic that I know is very important to our city council, which is why we're here today. So thank you all so much. And with that, everyone have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank
Pleasure to
you.
be here. Good luck, Santa Ana. Give us a call if you need more.
Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.